Hey, are you thinking about getting into short-term rentals? Well, you are in the right place. So my name is Kate Stormer. I'm a coach, consultant, and educator in the short-term rental space, and we are going to dive right in to talk about all the things that you might need to be thinking about around getting into short-term rentals. And today's video is really going to be around getting started in acquisition and all the things you need to be thinking about in that regard. So we're going to talk about mostly income potential. We'll touch on regulations. That's a big issue in our industry right now. Some financing options. I'll touch on operations in the sense as it impacts acquisition decisions. And then also we'll touch on some legal and risk management pieces that you need to be thinking about. And I've been in this field for over 5 years now. I've worked with many people. I'm first and foremost a coach consultant in the area, working with folks who are getting into this. And I always start, no matter who you are, why we're working together, is we start with goal clarity. And this is really important for you for a couple of reasons. One is whose content you choose to consume and people you choose to learn from. You want to learn from people whose sort of goals align with what you're looking to achieve. And you may not realize the spectrum of people that are in the industry and what they are achieving and how they're growing wealth or getting into short-term rentals. The other thing is it actually makes your acquisition strategy cleaner if you know why you're going into this to the first place. And again, because I've worked with so many people, I understand sort of some of the differences between folks. And so I tend to work with a lot of people who are getting into this for pure investment reasons. So on the far end of that spectrum are people who maybe never step foot in a property, or they'll be like, look, maybe I spend a weekend there once a year, but like, this is an investment. You know, maybe I've got extra money I want to put into real estate. Maybe I've heard I could get a good return on this. Maybe I'm a high net worth individual trying to get into some of the tax benefits of this. But basically, we are looking for an ROI on our dollar, and there's no other considerations that need to be made. On the other side of that, I've literally worked with people who have come into me and said, look, we want to be on this lake with this number of bedrooms, this kind of frontage, this is our budget, and in order to make this really doable for us, we're going to rent it out a few times a year. Okay, so lifestyle and the home is the pure driver of every acquisition decision that they're going to make. So then, you know, obviously in the middle, we have the folks who this is an investment, but maybe they're going to take advantage of the fact that you can stay in a short-term rental up to 14 days a year, and it still is 100% a business for you. So a great example of this is I had a client a couple of years ago, high net worth individual. Every year they go and would rent an ocean house with the extended family, and he would foot the bill. And so this is $10,000, $15,000 a year. He's like, can we turn this into an asset versus an annual liability? Now, it took more than $15,000, but over time, he certainly did buy that oceanfront property. He has it with a property manager. He and his family go and stay in it, you know, once a year. Now, instead of a 7-day vacation, it may be a 10-day vacation. It may be a 12-day vacation once a year. The rest of the year, it is purely a short-term rental. So he's obviously not writing that big check anymore for the vacation. And this property is killing it for him. Plus it's appreciating, right? So those are the people who I'd say are right in the middle. And I work with probably more people like that than anybody. And so I'm thinking if there's a bell curve, those are the people who are sort of the most common. But certainly I work with some folks who are in this for cash flow. So they don't care as much about the ROI as they care about, I want to leave my 9-to-5 job. I want to pay my kids' college tuition. I want to save money for, you know, some other thing that I need money for. But the goal, the metric, the KPI they're looking at is cash flow, right? And then again, sort of in the middle between this is still an investment, this is totally a lifestyle, is the people who are like, okay, we're going to buy a place, you know, in Florida. We're going to rent it out during high season, but we're going to stay in it for 3 months on the shoulder seasons, right? I have even had one person who was like, listen, I'm going to buy places in areas that I want to visit, and I'm going to have 5 of them, and I'm going to just live between them. None of them are going to be my primary home. I'm going to stay in each of them for some part of the year. I want them to be good investments, but they also are going to have some elements that I personally need or want as I'm going to stay in them for some portion of every year. Okay, so there's a big spectrum in terms of why people are getting into this, that understanding that about yourself and in the people that you're choosing to consume their content can be super helpful for you and your strategy. So now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the short-term rental business. And it is a business. An investment is a business decision. Short-term rentals are a business. And it's acquisition and setup. Obviously operations is big because that's the day to day. How is the property being maintained and managed? How are we doing the back end, the bookkeeping, the accounting? How are we working with guests? How are we marketing this thing? Back end financial management, overseeing it, keeping plugged into whether or not it's continuing to be a good investment for you and meet the goals that you've laid out for it. And then legal and risk management is always an important component. So as we think about acquisition, we are going to think about what's the potential. That's what everyone wants to know, is how do you know income potential on a property? We're going to talk about that fairly in depth in this video. How much does it cost to get into it? What are some of the things that could influence this? What are my financing options? So these are some common questions we're going to cover. So the first one we're going to talk about, though, is how do we figure out income potential? And I will tell you, this is probably the biggest reason why a lot of folks come to see somebody like me, is they're not confident in the numbers that they're seeing. And obviously it's a big investment. You want to be confident. Well, let me tell you the true secrets about income potential. It is clearly driven by the market you're in. I'm in the state of Michigan. Properties on the west side of the state, closer to Chicago, can command 2, 3, even 4 times the average nightly rate of properties on the east side of the state. The data that we're able to collect to use as we are figuring out income potential is always looking backwards. And that's an important point I don't think enough people make in this. You have to be understanding what is driving price in this market and how might that influence it when I'm running, right? So that's an important thing. Marketing and management, we don't talk about this enough. Marketing and management influences income potential greatly. Okay, I would suggest, based on my experience, at least 30% of your income is influenced by how well marketed and management is. Now, obviously, if you have a terrible manager, that's really going to have a significant impact on your property. But even knowing how to work in the algorithms, knowing how to position the property listing in the booking platforms, all of those things can truly impact your bottom line. And so I never, if somebody comes to me and says, how much can I make with this property? I never give them a number. I give them a range, because this is huge. It's also important, as you're thinking about figuring out income potential, that you're selecting comparable properties correctly in order to really gauge what is comparable. So when we talk about what is a market, well, for 99% of people in this industry, the market is actually the people for whom your listing shows up as in Airbnb and Vrbo. And this is a really passive way of marketing. It's a really low threshold for marketing. If you are a skilled marketer, there's so much more that you could do outside of the booking platforms. But I would say most of the people that I meet, that's not what they do. And even if you are a great marketer, Airbnb and Vrbo, for a fairly low cost, can deliver a lot of eyeballs on your listing. Airbnb has the most market share in the United States. If you're elsewhere, that number would be different. It might be booking.com, it might be something else. But Airbnb in the United States has the most market share at 41%, followed by Vrbo at 21%. I think they had a much smaller market share at the end of 2024. Booking.com has about 8%. And then there are some niche local regional platforms that do pretty well, and direct bookings as well. Okay. But basically, if your property is showing up for a general area or a specific area, some areas like in the state of Michigan, people look for up north. Well, that could be a 3-4 hour radius. Whereas if I'm going to Orlando to go to Disney, then that's going to be a really tight radius in terms of my market, if you will. So as we think about income potential, where do we get the data? Like if I say to you, this house can potentially make $75,000, where am I getting that data from? Well, I get my data from AirDNA. The reason I get my data from there is because my mentor taught me to get it from there, because that's the one source that lenders will use if they're lending against income potential. That's a whole nother thing. It's a company that's been around the longest. They pull data from both Airbnb and Vrbo, and they do a lot of quality testing. There are other things, Data Rabu, I will show you from them. Mashvisor, there are many companies, some of which are actually getting data from AirDNA and repackaging it to give it to you. You can also get data from Airbnb and Vrbo, and then there are some pricing tools like Price Labs, Wheelhouse, Beyond, that also are increasingly doing market research data as well, which are pretty good actually. So I think these are really important things to consider and as sources for data. But the thing is no one source of data is complete. And I typically tell people that the numbers will get you 75 to 80% of the way there. But as you're going to see, income potential for an individual property is actually widely variable. And so if we take this example, and again, I'm in Michigan, this is for an area in upper Michigan. It's a little bit rural and outside of a big, probably the biggest tourism area in our state. And as you can tell by the price, because if it were in Traverse City, it would be a lot more money. And so as we look at this as an example, you can see it's a fairly nondescript offering. It kind of, has a cute look to it. It's clearly in the woods. We're not going to spend a lot of time digging into this right now. But as we go to the data, scraped data. AirDNA's data is basically data that they've scraped from the interwebs. It's, Airbnb isn't selling us their data. Vrbo isn't selling us their data. So we basically have to recreate data. Which means it's an imperfect database, right? So a company like AirDNA, they do a lot of testing and they do a lot of rebuilding and quality checking to try and give pretty good data. And their data source is reporting on the transaction. So it's reporting on all funds transferred to the property manager or owner, which is going to exclude the money, say, that Airbnb holds back for platform fees or that are held back by the payment processor or whatever in that. So if I ask AirDNA this particular property address, how much might it make? It's telling me it might make $23,500 a year with a 40% occupancy rate. So now I'm going to go and ask it, well, what happens in this marketplace? What on average happens in this marketplace? And I'm going to tell you, I adjusted this for occupancy potential because most of these data clearinghouses will give you data by bedroom count, but a 4-bedroom may host 20 people. It may host 10 people. People will pay more for larger occupancy homes. It is better to select your market based on occupancy. Okay, so for the occupancy likely suitable for the home we are looking at, they're saying 23.7. Remember, it was 23.5 is what AirDNA was telling us. At a 48% occupancy in the marketplace, they were telling us that particular property might make a 40%. Now, if I go over to Data Rabu, they have lots of products as well. They do have a free rentalizer. It's saying we could make $29,000 based on 11 nearby Airbnbs. They do not pull Vrbo data here. Okay, so that is what they're saying. So somewhere between $23,000 and $29,000, right? Well, how much would it cost us to own this house? This is my back of the envelope sort of view. I just used a plain mortgage calculator. Assuming I'm going to pay whatever I'm going to pay, I put this in at the asking price, made some assumptions about property taxes and homeowners insurance, and that comes out to be just under $20,000 to own the property. Now, we have lots of expenses when you own a property, right? So back of the envelope, when I started, my mentor said you can use a multiplier of 20 or 30% of your annual mortgage payment in order to come up with a estimated annual expense. This is just a way of deciding whether or not you want to further explore the opportunity, because it takes a lot of time to actually do the work to get confident about the income potential and the opportunity in front of you, right? So how do we know a property is worth looking into? Well, so I'm going to come up with this sort of, I'm not going to go through and do a whole budget sheet. I'm just going to use my 0.4 at this point in time. I should note, by the way, if you're in like Florida or in Colorado, where fires are a big thing, insurance is becoming ridiculously expensive. And so you might really want to look at the price you're writing in for insurance. Anyway, so if we do this and we multiply out our mortgage with taxes and insurance by that 0.4, that gives me 27,000. Well, our range was 23 to 29 just based on the numbers alone. So the thing I want to do is it worth my time to further explore? Well, 27, is there an opportunity in this market? What are the price drivers in this market that I might be able to push on to get either toward the higher end of that or even exceed that? So I'm going to go and look at what are the price drivers, right? And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to look at, number one, I like to look at what are the top grossing properties in this market and what do they possess? What amenities do they have? Well, it should not surprise you that they're either waterfront, they have water access, or they have water views. They have a hot tub or a pool. They have nice architecture. They have, really fantastic outdoor spaces. This is a unique and elevated interior. Now, keep in mind, this is a vacation market. If you are looking at a more utilitarian or an urban market, some of these things might be different for you, right? I have literally, been surprised, though. There was one market I looked at where properties with pools didn't make any more money. In my state of Michigan, if you've got a pool, you make a lot more money. So, these price drivers are going to be different, but some of them make sense. If you're a vacationer going to the mountains, you're probably willing to pay more for a beautiful deck with a big, expansive mountain view versus, sitting down in the woods nestled into the mountains. But each individual consumer will have different priorities. We just sort of want to gauge, is there anything price driver wise for this property? So this property, as we look at it and we look at some of the neighbors and what they're offering, it's not on the water. You can't see the water. You'd have to walk to the water. It's not very big. It has some nice land, but in order to get this sort of up to a really unique and unusual and fantastic place, you'd have to put a lot of money into it, which you're probably not going to want to do because water access is probably the biggest price driver in this market, right? So now this is going to be for a more economy or budget level property, which means you're not going to be able to charge a big price on that, right? So I'm going to say, yes, this income range is probably pretty correct, close to average. It's probably in the 23 to 25, and it's going to cost me 27-ish. Is this worth my time to continue to look into? Maybe. It depends on your goals. Some people just want the property, and whether or not it makes money doesn't really matter, but most people want something that makes money. So you have to make your own decision. This would be a pass for me. But I want to remind you, okay, this is literally a 15-foot tall by, 30-foot long potato in the middle of a farm field, 30 minutes from anything, that is killing it as an Airbnb. If you're great on social media, if you're great with marketing, if you have a highly unique and novel experience, you can make money. And I don't want to discourage you by being too overly focused on the data, because this is hospitality, this is marketing. There are opportunities out there that if you're creative enough and you're willing to do the work to really promote it outside of the platforms to get eyeballs upon it, you can make money. I think that I read an article that all in, she was like $25,000, and it makes like $60,000 a year. It's been operating for now like 9 or 10 years. So as we move on from that overview of income potential, let's talk regulations, because this is perhaps the biggest threat to success in short-term rentals. Regulations can come at the state level, the county level, the individual municipality, from homeowners, even from the deed to your property. Okay, so all of these things need to be considered around regulations. If you're in a market that has a lot of short-term rentals, it probably has a very mature set of regulations and there's less risk versus an area where there are not many, and it's increasingly becoming an issue. Many states are pursuing short-term rentals at the state level to have a registry, to have additional taxes. So it's worth looking into to make sure that you're cleared on this. And so for this property in the Zillow listing or whatever, it's in the township of Kalkaska. And so in order to assess the regulatory environment, I'm going to go first to the Kalkaska Township city or village website and see what they have. I'm going to look and see, do they have an ordinance, a rental ordinance, a short-term rental ordinance? I'm going to look in their zoning documents to see if there's anything that explicitly allows or disallows me to short-term rent in that area. And if I don't see anything, then I'm probably going to call up the township clerk. But the other thing I'm going to do, particularly again, if I'm in an area where there are not a lot of short-term rentals, but even if it is a more mature area, you might want to investigate. I will download the last 6-12 months of short-term rental or of board township meeting minutes or planning commission minutes. I actually use ChatGPT to do this, but to scan through them and see if they're talking about any changes around short-term rentals, because it is such a sort of chaotic environment in many areas right now around short-term rentals, and there's a lot of new regulation being introduced. So this is helpful to know. I should note, if you're buying in a commercial area, you are less likely for this to be a problem, but of course, there's not as many residential homes in commercial areas. So, and they're often not desirable, especially from a vacation perspective, right? So just good things to be aware of. So I want to give a shout out. I am the president of the Michigan Short-Term Rental Association. We're a nonprofit that is devoted to helping with education, networking, and advocacy to help make sure that regulation and legislation is fair to short-term rentals. We need to band together in order to do this. We're under the umbrella of the national organization called Rent Responsibly, and there are a number of these alliances across the United States. So it's a really good resource for information specific to your locality. And even if you're not interested in getting too involved, your dues can be really helpful for others like myself who are really actually trying to make sure to do that work and show up at state houses and courthouses and township meetings. So as we move on, let's talk about financing. So if you are looking to finance and you're not paying cash or you don't already own the property, a lot of people is first getting into this are looking at second home loans. And the reason they look at second home loans is because often you could do it with 10% down and you usually get a lower interest rate on those. Other options would be just a straight investment loan. There are some lenders that do a commercial loan called a DSCR, debt service coverage ratio, which just means they will lend on the rental potential of the property versus your personal financial situation, which can be a really nice option, but typically you have to have at least a year experience in the short-term rental space in order to be eligible for a loan like that. I have worked with clients who have just taken money out against their primary home in order to fund their short-term rental. So as we think about financials, what are some of the startup costs? So down payment, closing costs, if you need to do renovations, obviously furnishing and setting it up, and you don't want to cheap too much out on this. I'm going to do another video here shortly on marketing and setting up your short-term rental with your marketing in mind. Your holding costs, this is big. So I bought actually both of my personally owned short-term rentals right after high season. So highly seasonal markets. And so I had to, there was no way I was going to be making money right away. Both of those properties make most of their money between Labor Day and Memorial Day. So I had to make sure I had enough money to cover the holding costs to hold those until we really started making the good money in the high season. So something to think about, right? And most people, you're not going to out the gates be making the optimal amount of money. It can take 6 to 18 months to really realize your income potential. You need great reviews. You need to be showing up in the algorithms, all those things. And then finally, you might need some financials for your legal setup, depending on what you do. We'll talk about that here in a minute shortly. So costs to consider when you're budgeting. I do have a workbook. I can give you the link if you're interested. I go over all this. I have more information about all this. I can't possibly cover all this in one video. But utilities, cable, water, sewer, short-term rental insurance, very important. Homeowners insurance does not cover any incidences that happens if you are using the home for commercial purposes, which short-term rental is. So you have to get short-term rental specific insurance. It is usually 3, 4, even 5 times the amount of homeowners insurance. Obviously taxes, your debt servicing, pest control, lawn care, snow removal, pool, hot tub care, house repairs and maintenance. I typically counsel people to set aside some funds for capital expenditures. They will come. You'll need a roof. You'll need concrete repair, whatever. And then many municipalities or states have permits or fees associated with being able to be a short-term rental. Some of the variable costs that will vary depending on your occupancy and your revenue. If you work with a property manager, or your fees specific to Vrbo and Airbnb, your cleaning fees, sales and or lodging taxes, and consumables, the coffee you leave, the toilet paper, the paper towels, all those things you leave for guests. So I have a lot more information on some of this, some recommended amounts to budget in my short-term rental analyzer spreadsheet and the short-term rental investing roadmap. It is just a quick $5 donation will get you those resources. They're fabulous. It will help you put all that together. I can give you the link for that here when we're through. Operations wise, so things that can impact your budget model is if you are going to outsource any or all of the operations or keep them in-house. So self-managing, obviously you're doing it all yourself. Maybe you hire a cleaner or handyman, but basically you're doing everything yourself. We will talk in a different video a little bit more about self-managed or outsourcing management. I have a blog on my website already about that. But in the spectrum of types, hybrid management, so there's some really big national companies. I honestly don't recommend them, like Evolve or Red Awning. They're too large to really give you the level of service that I think you need, but maybe it works for you. Lots of people do use them. You could use a co-host. Airbnb has a co-hosting platform, lots of education about it on there. That's basically you own the listing, you put it up, and then you invite somebody to come in and manage some part of that. Maybe it's guest communications, maybe it's everything. It's, who knows? And then maybe you're handling everything on the digital end and you've got somebody locally that's handling everything on the ground. Lots of ways. And then there's full service management. These are my investors who are very hands off. They just want to say, here's the property, you're in charge of it, and send me my check every month. And full service management companies, you have to ask them because not all of them do everything. So maybe, I talked to a company one time that was like, we don't arrange for lawn care. That is on you. And then other companies will do everything. You probably still have to pay the utility bills and the taxes and all that kind of stuff. So you're not going to get it away scot-free, but everything to do with the short-term renting and making sure the house is ready for short-term renting, typically a full service manager will handle for you. Pricing wise on these, hybrid tends to be, I've seen it between 15 and 25%. And then full service management, typically you're going to be probably anywhere from 22% all the way up to 35%. Some of this is going to be regional. Some of this is going to be depending on the level of service that you get. I have known some folks who were in like these resort communities that were paying 45, 50%. And I mentioned this in my workbook and the questions to ask property managers, but how do they assume the percentage of commission? I think that's a really important question. It can make a big difference in your bottom line about whether or not they include platform fees or exclude them. If there's other fees that they charge, do you get a commission off of those? Lots of things to consider that can impact your bottom line. So final point here, legal and risk management for you to think about. Lots of things I get questions about here for people who are getting into this. Should you set up your short-term rental as a business? That is a personal choice. If it is just you or you and your spouse, you do not have to. But anybody who's thinking about asset protection would tell you, yes, you should. But that has then the impetus of buying the asset, the home in your business name versus your name. Most people who are coming into this are getting a second home loan. Depending on the product, you might be able to deed that property over to your business after a year. You may not be able to at all. You can ask more questions about that offline if you'd like. But from an asset protection standpoint, your business structure and having everything in a business is one of the principles of having a sound asset protection strategy. Having the right insurance, including liability insurance for you and your business. And then also having a really solid rental agreement, even if they're booking on a platform. Some people will push back on this, and that is okay. This is just a recommendation. You don't have to follow through with it. Airbnb does not like this. But when I book through Airbnb, that booking is between me and Airbnb, not with you, the host, right? And so if you want to protect yourself, if you've got kayaks or bikes or something, you need some liability, you probably want to have an additional rental agreement in place between you and the renter. And then finally, again, a great resource, if there's a alliance, like Rent Responsibly in your area, that may be a helpful resource in thinking about these things. So that is everything for this video. I will be introducing some other videos for this playlist in getting started in short-term rentals. Hopefully they're already there when you're listening to this. Give me a subscribe so you get notifications. You can check out my website. Feel free to email me if you've got a question. In the meantime, I will drop that link to that workbook. Again, it's $5 to get the workbook, 30 pages, questions to ask a realtor, questions to ask a property manager, things to budget for, way more detail than I could get into here. And that certainly supports my small business as well. I hope this was helpful, and hope to see you again.